This video is brought to you by Midway USA. Support the channel by choosing Midway for your shooting and outdoor supplies. Welcome to 9-Hole Reviews. Today we're going to look at an example of a top premium quality LPVO, one which some consider the best 1-6 on the market. This is the Kahles K16i. With some of the best on-paper stats of any LPVO, peaked with an absolutely monstrous field of view, the Kahles and its European glass top the charts in terms of on-paper performance. But does this optic live up to this monumental reputation? Is it indeed the best? And if so, how much better is this optic than the number of much more affordable solutions out there? We'll explore these questions and more. But first, this is your friendly reminder that if you're enjoying the show, consider joining us on Utreon and following us on Rumble. Now, let's get on with it. As a starting point, we'll go to what looking down this optic is like. And as you might expect, it's got stunning glass. Extremely clear, sharp, and crisp. Edge to edge, the image is beautiful. You can see the impact marks on targets hundreds of yards away. But is it a monumental improvement over top Japanese glass-equipped optics? Well, no, we wouldn't say monumental. You really need to be looking through two optics side by side under equal conditions to really see the differences here. If given a blind tester against a handful of other top LPVOs, we'd probably still choose this image quality as best, but it wouldn't be extremely easy or obvious. Suffice to say, the clarity on the K16i doesn't disappoint, but to use a simple analogy, it's not as if you put on glasses for the first time in your life or anything of that nature, unless you're upgrading from a truly budget tier optic. Next up, we're going to look at the reticle. This is the newest reticle introduced to the Kahles LPVO line, the 3GR. Let's not pull any punches or drag this out. In terms of performance shooting, the 3GR is one of the best LPVO reticles we've seen for a second focal plane optic. You get speed and tracking up close, and the attributes to allow for reasonably precise shots at distance with hold-off points for wind and a unique set of mill come-ups which are ideal for speedy engagement on known distance targets out to 500 to 600 or so. Now, let's dig into this a bit. The 3GR is quite a unique setup. It's a hybrid between a full crosshair with 4 stadia and a T crosshair with 3 stadia. You'll notice the exterior T-shaped stadia are thick, with the 4th top stadia and inner stadia and mill tree being thin. This setup allows the user to track the reticle relatively fast up close using the thick stadia, while also maintaining a clearer, less cluttered image with a more refined set of aiming points for engagement at distance. But that's not the whole story. You'll see the 3GR also has a second aiming point in the mill grid, so a center aiming point and a secondary aiming point lower at +2 mils in the grid. Both dots also illuminate. We'll cover the illumination power more in a minute, but the second illuminated point allows the user to set much faster firing solutions at range. Think about how many times you found yourself counting off mils or BDC come-up points in the reticle when taking aim at a distance target, or trying to remember your mill come-ups at a given distance. Well, those things aren't required here. Much like you can use the center aiming point to hold on targets from 0 to 300 plus or minus. By holding slightly low or slightly high, you can do the same thing with the secondary aiming point from, say, 350 to 500 or so. If you aren't following, let me lay it out with my setup as an example. I run a 200-yard 0 with the center aiming point. At 100, I'm holding slightly low, 200 obviously dead on, 300 is slightly high, all with the center aiming point. When I get to 400, I start using the secondary aiming point with a belly hold, then move to an upper chest hold at 500 and a hat style hold at 550. So without having to look at the mills at all, I have aiming points for all targets within the normal range I'm asking this rifle to engage at speed with. Beyond these distances, it's then about knowing precise holds, but the two aiming points set up in the 3GR present an extremely intuitive and speedy solution to basically use the reticle like you're engaging point targets. With that said, I mentioned this is ideal for known distance shooting. That's because while this optic is very intuitive as described for fire solutions, you don't have the same intuitive ranging capabilities as something like the ACSS reticles as an example. It's arguable that at the distances we're talking about, this isn't extremely relevant, but it's a worthy consideration. Now, we mentioned illumination power, so let's get that out of the way as well. While the dots do turn red, they are not anywhere close to aimpoint bright. They aren't as bright as the Razor Gen 2 or 3, or the Nightforce ATACR, or the NX8. The illumination here is functional to change the color when maxed out in broad daylight, which on this particular optic is actually still valuable based on the aiming solutions we just discussed at range, but isn't sufficient to be used as a core aiming or tracking tool, in our opinion. Now, let's consider the eye box and field of view. The eye box here is extremely solid. We'd say it matches up right in with the Razor Gen 2, which years later still remains our standard reference point for this particular category of evaluation. As you can see, there's a ton of forgiveness here at 1 power, and even up at 6 power, there's plenty of room to be imperfect, or for if you're forced to get behind the optic in a less than ideal shooting position. So on to field of view, and we alluded to this at the beginning of the session. The field of view stat here is insane. On 1 power, you're looking at 127 feet. This is top of the charts, best in category here. Absolutely fantastic. The image is gigantic at 1 power. For reference, the Razor is 10% tighter in this category. That is not a marginal difference. You will feel this when you pick up the optic. At the top end of 6 power, the Kahles comes in at 20 feet, effectively matching the Razor and beating out a huge number of other top LPVOs. So with what looking through the optic is like out of the way, let's get on to the controls. The most obvious to hit on straight away here is the power adjustment. How easy can you flip between magnification settings? Well, the Kahles is smooth and silky in this category. It's not loose or the fastest we've used, but with the built-in throw lever, it's got just the right amount of resistance to feel solid, but also move from min to max with one single motion. It's worth mentioning that the min and max power are actually flipped on this particular optic compared to most other optics on the US market, meaning that 1 power is actually all the way cranked to the right and max is all the way to the left, whereas most other commercial optics are the opposite, with min being all the way to the left and max being all the way to the right. Point being, this takes a bit of getting used to from a training perspective and is worth considering. Next, onto the turrets. The turrets here are capped, which seems perfect for what we're trying to do with this optic, and based on the fact that we have an extremely intuitive set of aiming solutions in the mill grid. When it comes to construction, these turrets feel perfectly solid, and they adjust in 0.1 mil increments, which is actually probably more refined than is needed on a 6 power max magnification optic, but we aren't complaining, and we're getting increased levels of precision here. On to the illumination adjustment. Unlike some optics that have a numbered dial, the Kahles simply has a rotating power knob, which goes from minimum all the way to maximum with no offsettings in between, which is a bit of a pain since we're using the optic on max setting if we're turning on the illumination every single time, with the exception of pitch darkness. Lastly, let's discuss footprint. For an optic with this performance profile, it could end up being a heavy son of a gun. But no, the Kahles comes in at just 16.9 ounces. This is in line with minimalist LPVO setups, beating out the Nightforce NX8 and matching up within a tenth of an ounce of the Primary Arms PLX-C. This is bonkers when considering the totality of performance here. Absolutely killer. Now, it is still long in overall length at just under 11 inches, but we can live with that given the circumstances. And so there you have it. That's our take on the Kahles K16i. In summary, an optic that nails it on pretty much every category straight out of the box. But as we always say with LPVOs, there is no free lunch. The cost of the K16i is high. Now, it isn't Nightforce Attacker levels of expensive, but it isn't that far off. This is a $2,000 optic. It's worth considering how increased cost relates to increased performance here. As cost on tools like this increase, the quality or performance does not grow proportionally in relation to the cost. The last few ounces, the last few whatevers in terms of performance are always the most expensive to improve on. So if you have an unlimited budget and want to play with one of the very top tier LPVOs on the market, the Kahles may be for you. And if it is, consider picking it up on midwayusa.com. As always, we appreciate you tuning in, and until next time, we'll see you on the range.
716, this is Gillnet 6, 4 Vic, 8 pads, Recon 1, green to green, how copy, over.
296, this is 716, roger, over. 16, still night 1, 1 pack, green, green, over. This is 716, roger, over. 16, still night 2, 1 Victor, 2 packs, Recon 1.